Welcome to Rock and Roll High School, your choice for in-depth and personal conversations with the most legendary artists in the history of contemporary music. Come with us as we explore the albums and songs that have become the soundtrack of our lives. Here's your host, Pete Ganbarg.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock and Roll High School. My guest this week is the legendary Peter Noone, also known as Herman, from the band Hermits. Herman's Hermits had an incredible run of hit records beginning in 1964 with their recording of Carole King and Gerry Goffin's I'm Into Something Good. That song went all the way to #1 in the UK, and working with legendary UK record producer Mickie Most was quickly followed by more smashes. Songs like Can't You Hear My Heartbeat, Silhouettes, Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, I'm Henry VIII I Am, and There's a Kind of Hush. In 1965, when Peter was still only 17 years old, Herman's Hermits had a remarkable 7 top 10 singles in America, all in less than one calendar year. All in all, Herman's Hermits have sold over 50 million records worldwide. Since then, Peter continues to tour and is still an excellent voice, having done vocal exercises for 45 minutes a day every day since 1983. You can hear him weekly on SiriusXM satellite radio as the host of Something Good with Peter Noone on 60s Gold every Saturday.
There's a kind of hush all over the world. Tonight, all over the world, you can hear the sounds of lovers in love. You know what I mean? Just the two of us and nobody else in sight.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock and Roll High School. My guest today from Santa Barbara, California, is Peter Noone. Hi, Peter.
How you doing, Peter? It's nice to see you.
I'm well, thank you. And a belated happy birthday to you. It was your birthday last week.
Yeah, I have one every year.
You know, every year around this time. You know, we were talking right before we went live about how hard you work, and we'll get into the amount of concerts you're still doing. But you have been, as Herman of Herman's Hermits, you've been doing this over 60 years now, which is pretty incredible.
You know, I was walking down Lexington Avenue one day with Jack Bruce. We were going to go and see, we both had the same manager for about a year. He recalled a 1961 fight in a transport cafe, it was called, in England, when I was in a band. I'm not sure if it was a Pete Novak or Pete Novak and the Heartbeats or the Cyclones. And I couldn't believe that I could have been in the band in 1961 because I would have been 13. But he remembered it vividly.
You were in the fight yourself?
Yeah, you know, he remembered. I'm not sure it didn't really get going, but what used to happen in the period was that people who drove trucks would like to shout, "Are you a boy or a girl?" It just was a part of our culture. I'd unscrewed the legs from my mother's coffee table, and they were like screw-in legs, and they were the perfect length to hide it up your sleeve of your whatever kind of clothes you were wearing. And we were all kind of teddy boys, so we had jackets on all the time, even in the van. He remembers me explaining to somebody how you had to hit somebody before they got near you with this dobber, because if you didn't hit them, they would take it off you and hit me with it.
And this is what Jack Bruce remembered so many years later.
He remembered this stupid little kid. And then one day we were talking about fights and how I thought I was handy and I really wasn't. And he talked about like Ginger Baker. This all happened on a walk along Lexington Avenue. He remembered that maybe it was 7th Avenue, that Ginger Baker had said once had come right in my face in a club, the Cromwellian Club, which was like a posh club, and he'd gone, "Ugh," in my face. Ginger did that a lot. You know, he was like, "Ah," like his ginger hair and face. And I said, "I'm going to knock your block off." And Jack stood there and I said, "Peter, don't go out there." And I said, "Well, I'm going to get him." He said, "Listen, Peter, he will kill you." And 50 or 60 years later, we talked about it, and I said, yeah, and he said, yeah, because he would have killed you. He wasn't going to beat you up. He was going to kill you.
It's a good thing you didn't. Let's go back to the beginning. You're originally from Manchester, and you went to the Manchester School of Music as a child, and you were recruited for kid actors. You want to talk about Coronation Street?
Yeah, that was one of them that I did. I think what happened was that it was a school of music, and they had a drama and elocution class. And, because in the period, it's strange, it's hard to imagine, but in the period, if you had first of all, right before, if you had an Irish accent, you were thought to be stupid. You couldn't get a job if you had an Irish, if you talked like that, because somehow in England, they had this feeling that anybody who was from Ireland was stupid. Then it turned into being, if you couldn't speak Oxford English, you couldn't compete with the toffs from London and stuff like that. So my mother had decided, my mother was the CFO of a corporation, and she was stuck in that level because she had an English, North of England accent. So she sent me really to do this, one of the classes at the school, because I was bored at night because there was nothing for me to do. My parents both worked. And to keep me out of trouble, they sent me to Manchester School of Music. So I thought I was learning how to do music, but they put me in a drama and elocution class. And one day we were doing, Father's car is a Jaguar and Papa drives rather fast. Through castles, barns and drafty farms, we go driving past. Arthur's cart is far less smart and can't go half as fast. But I'd rather drive in Arthur's car than my papa, Arthur's cart than my papa's fast car. And it was to learn, so not to say fast car, my dad's fast car. A guy from the local television station, which had just opened, Granada Television, independent television, had just started in England. So it was 1961. I was shy but noisy and bratty. They said, we're looking for somebody, schoolboy, who can speak a bit. So I said, well, I did one of those, and him. And they took me over to the Granada Television, which was just around the corner, and I did an audition. And they asked me to read a page from a script, and it was easy, it was easy. And I read it, and I got the job as this. It was in Knight Errant. I spent the whole day at Granada Television, and they took my line out. But I was seen on the television, and my mom and my Auntie Celia, they took pictures of the television because now I was a star. And I got in the union. In those days, you couldn't be in the Actors Equity Union until you had a job. And you couldn't get a job until you were in the Actors Union.
Right.
But I somehow waltzed through all that and got a job without being in the union because I was 12 or 13. So now I'm in the union. So every time they want boy, they called me. I was the person, and my connection was the two guys who owned the Manchester School of Music.
Right.
And they like my agents. So I would every other week I'd get these jobs, and it gave me, and they paid money. And it was a different kind of money because all the taxes had been taken out and stuff like that. So all the money they gave me was actually my money. So I took that money, and eventually I got in a series called Coronation Street, which was a huge series. It was huge. Everybody in England was watching it every Thursday night. And I played the son of the lead. And I wasn't in it much, but I didn't have many speaking parts, but I was in it a lot in the background and everything. So I was like famous with people who, once again, my Auntie Celia watched everyone. And I used the money. I'd seen local bands, and I'd realized if you had a good van and good equipment, people thought you were better than you really were. And I invested all the money that I made from the television thing into equipment. I bought a good microphone, and I just invested all the money from being an actor in this band called Pete Novak and the Heartbeats. And I stopped going to school because I was making money. I had a job as a window cleaner because you just went and knocked on people's doors and said, Mrs. Wiggins, would you like me to clean the windows? And I also sold newspapers on the corner on Saturdays. And I didn't deliver newspapers. I picked them up in the van that we'd bought with the money from the everything worked around money, really, you know, and we were kind of the very first pay to play. And we quickly got a manager because we were busy.
This was the Cyclones, or this was Pete Novak and the Heartbeats?
This was Pete Novak and the Heartbeats. We just grew very quickly because really what happened in August 1963, me and one of the Cyclones, or whatever we were called that year, sometimes we'd do a gig and change our name. That's how bad we were. I was at my grandmother's house and I could hear somebody tuning up a guitar in the distance. And we actually crossed a field and Church Road, and there was a field on the other side. And on the stage, directly, just came back from Hamburg, were the Beatles. And we were astonished. There was another group on the bill called Brian Poole and the Tremolos, who were kind of old timers and they'd been around for a long time and we knew all about them. But then this group called the Beatles showed up on the stage during the first song that they played, which was astonishing because it was completely different from Brian Poole and the Tremolos. It was more, there was no fourth wall. It was a brand new kind of event. The Beatles were all interacting with each other and laughing at their mistakes. And the bass player from this band, I remember his name was Alan Wrigley, during the second song that they played, which was an American hit song, he said, "We're fucked."
Meaning Pete Novak and the Heartbeats are fucked because these guys are much better than we are.
He meant he was. He didn't mean we were. He meant, you know, whatever it is that we are doing,
right,
has got no future.
Right.
Because I'll never be able to play even as good as, you know, their driver.
Right. So he was deterred by that, but you were not.
I was inspired because I thought, wouldn't it be great fun to be like in the Marines, like the Beatles, where each person has a role and you don't have, you know, a trombone player and you don't need a big van. You can get all the band and everything that you need if you've got a show,
right,
and tour. Because
right,
the Beatles probably made £300 at that day. They probably got paid £300, which
right,
is $500,
right,
and they all made a living.
Right.
They managed to put all the big bands. My dad was in a big band, and that trombone stayed upstairs for the next 50 years because there was no call for it.
Yep.
So it all happened really quickly. You know, we'd driven around in a van and we never stopped. And we were the hardest working band ever, and we would do it for nothing. You know, we would back strippers, we would play in the wrong place.
You're putting in your 10,000 hours, as they say now, like the Beatles did in Hamburg, to try to get as good as you possibly can. You enjoyed playing and you wanted to play as much as you could.
But we just wanted to play. Maybe some people call that work, but we never thought of it as work. We thought of it, this is a hobby that we're all into, and we all like this kind of music. So let's do this until we drop.
Well, one of the things that's absolutely fascinating about your career that I'm not sure if the audience listening realizes is how young you were at this time.
But everybody was.
Well, the Beatles were a little older, right?
Yeah, and they'd been going a long time. But when we started, everybody was 6 years older than us. That's the significant number,
right,
6.
Right.
The Beatles were exactly 6 years older than me, all of them.
Right.
The Stones were exactly 6 years older than me. The Beatles had a young guy in them as well, which made them odd because George was only 3 years older than me. So we didn't think we were young. We thought we were a bit like punks, a bit kind of Sex Pistols, because nobody was doing what we were doing. We were doing odd songs. We would do My Boy Lollipop.
Right.
And we'd do really romantic songs that people left alone. You know, we did The End of the World at the Cavern and stuff like that. And,
right,
and men hated us because of the choice of songs. We did a Bobby Rydell song. Oh, my, you know, that's so uncool.
Right. You had an older sister who had a record collection and you heard all these songs, right?
I knew all her songs. When I got my first job in a band, they said to me, "Do you know any of these songs?" And I looked at what would now be called a set list, and it was a list of all the songs they knew, and I knew every one of them. And one of them was "I'll Never Dance Again" by Bobby Rydell. And that was the first song I sang in the first band I was in.
So how did Pete Novak and the Heartbeats evolve into Herman and the Hermits? I heard a great story about you putting on your Buddy Holly glasses and the publican inside the pub didn't think you looked like Buddy Holly. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, we were playing in a pub in a suburb of Manchester. The whole of Manchester was a suburb. And we used to play in pubs because they had a stage, and it was a little stage and you could get on it. So we'd get there early and kind of rehearse. We'd use the space. The pub had a PA and a microphone. It's hard to imagine really how limited the scope was of work because they needed to have a PA and a microphone until we bought our own. So he had a PA and a microphone. We're on this little stage, and I'm doing my little things. Buddy Holly was our thing. The Heartbeats. We thought we'd like a tribute band. And he walks over and he actually said the words, "What the bloody hell are you doing?" And I was like, kind of taken aback. I said, "Well, isn't it obvious? It's like Buddy Holly. Look, the glasses and everything." And he said, "You look nothing like Buddy Holly. You look like Herman from the Bullwinkle Show." And we all laughed because he meant Sherman from the Bullwinkle Show.
Mr. Peabody and Sherman, our favorite.
Yeah. And he thought I was that little kid with the horn-rimmed glasses, not Buddy Holly. And everybody laughed, and he said, "And I don't think you should call yourselves the Heartbeats. You look more like bloody Hermits." And Heartbeats was a word that was kind of 50s already, you see. And
right.
Hermits was suddenly, it was even cooler than Freddie and the Dreamers and Jerry and the Pacemakers. It was like cooler.
So thanks to the publican, the manager of the pub, Pete Novak and the Heartbeats become Herman's Hermits, right?
No, we became Herman and the Hermits for a while.
Right, Herman and the Hermits, right.
And then we got a manager, and on April the 1st, 1964, after about 3 years in the business, we became Herman's Hermits because truthfully, it was a better name than Herman and the Hermits, right. That's all.
So with the manager you're talking about, is that Harvey Lisberg?
Yeah, he was fantastic, because I often say this and people may misinterpret it, but none of it would have happened without him.
How did you meet Harvey and how did Harvey come to find the band?
Like everybody, there was just a lot of things happened at the same time. We used to play at this place called The Cellar in the Beachcomber in Bolton. And Bolton at the time had seen the very tail end of the Industrial Revolution and textiles. And there was a little dumpy club there, and we got a gig there, and it was kind of one of our every week kind of places. And he came looking for us, and he liked the band, and we made a meeting at my mother's house because my mother had the nicest house and she had a phone. My mother was like the only businesswoman in the town. She was just an accountant, but she had a phone and a car and all that stuff. So we had a meeting at my house, and in my mother's front room, we had a baby grand piano like that one, a white one, and in her front room. And that was the music room. And we sat in the room, and he had to go on the piano, and he played What Did I Say, the Jerry Lee Lewis version. So we asked him, would you be in the band? He was like 20. He was like this old guy. And he said, "No, I don't want to be in the band. I want to be the manager." So we thought, well, somebody who can play the piano that good, nearly as good as Jerry Lee Lewis, he's got to be a great manager. And we didn't sign a deal. We said, "Okay, you're the manager." And he went off, and his friend John Wright, and they got booked as a load of dates. We found that we were working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Oh, what's happening on Sunday? Oh, we can play the football club. We can do an afternoon gig there. There's no money, but you can play there. And because the word play was in play,
right,
we didn't think of any of this as work. The work was like,
it was fun.
Yeah, every part of it was fun. And I still enjoy every part of the adventure. I enjoy getting in my car and going to the airport and getting on the plane and checking in the bags.
How many gigs are you doing a year? We're recording this in 2024. I've heard 100. I've heard 200. How many are you doing these days?
We did 108 in 2022. We did 104 in 2023. And 2024, we did 100. it's sort of trickling down only because there are less places to play, really. We would play more, but there are less places to play. And what has happened is that we've played everywhere a lot. You know? So we play in the same places over and over again. And there's still a market for the music because it's always been about the songs that we play and the amount of fun that we have. So 100, I think this next year, 2025, I'll guarantee my band 100 dates, okay? And there may be more.
Well, that's great. I mean, the show is fantastic, and these songs are evergreens at this point. We're going to talk about each one coming up, but talk about how Harvey got in touch with Mickie Most. Mickie Most, for those who don't know, one of the most successful British record producers of all time. Back then, he was having success with the Animals. How did Harvey connect with Mickie, and how did Mickie connect with Herman's Hermits?
Personally, I knew Mickie Most, and I hadn't met him, but I saw him on I was a fan of music. So when I wasn't playing in a band, I was going to look at other bands. I saw the Hollies and the Mavericks and every band in the world within 100 miles of my house. And I've been to see Sam Cooke, and I was at a show, Everly Brothers, Bo Diddley, Rolling Stones, and this new singer called Mickie Most.
And his Playboys, right?
I never remember the bands. I think there was one band for everybody. I think the Bo Diddley band was also the Everly Brothers band.
Right.
And it had Jim Gordon on drums.
Oh, gee, whiz.
Yeah. He was the only guy who could play boom, 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 boom.
That just went dark. For anyone who doesn't know the Jim Gordon story, there's a very scary book about his life, but that's for another time. Mickie was actually an artist in South Africa, and he had 11 #1 records before moving back to the UK.
Yeah, but we'd seen him, and it was fun in the show because he had no strings on his guitar, but he kneeled down to do the guitar solo. I was with my sister, and we both knew he had no guitar strings, and we thought that was cool. And after the show, by accident, we walked past the stage door and we met the Everly Brothers. We actually met them, and they were so charming. They completely changed my life. I go, if ever I make it in any way, I'm going to try and be as cool as the Everly Brothers, because we were little kids. We were kids, so you don't expect to see kids at the stage door. So then out of the stage door come the Rolling Stones, who were pretty odd looking at the time. There were no other people like that in the north of England. They were kind of spiffs. They were dressed differently, and they had long hair and kind of not a bit unkempt. Not unclean, unkempt. And they got on the bus. And then Mickie Most comes out with this beautiful girl, who was his wife, Christina. And behind the bus is parked a Porsche. And he opens what we think is the bonnet, the front of the car, and puts his guitar in there. And we watched this, my sister and I, like in awe. This guy has just put his guitar in the engine compartment of the car, because the Porsche had the engine at the back. And he opens the door for Christina, and she gets in the car, and he does like a regal wave like Prince Harry, as if he's the star of the show. So I'm impressed. I think that's the guy. And then we hear a record called Nashville Teens record, Tobacco Road. Down, Tobacco Road. And we go, because we listened incessantly to music.
Right.
It's never a time when there wasn't music going on. So the music is playing, and we hear this Tobacco Road, and we buy the record, and we see produced by Mickie Most. That's that bloke who kneels down and it's got a Porsche and everything. So then the Animals put out a record. I think maybe some crying. And we go, whoa, this guy is the guy. So there's some conversation always, whenever we're about Mickie Most, his name comes up. And Harvey thinks to get him to come to Manchester to see us at the Beachcomber, because that's where
Where is Mickie coming from? London?
London, yes. So he sends him a plane ticket. Mickie doesn't want anything. He's not going to go to Manchester. Who goes to Manchester? There's nothing happening in Manchester. Maybe if it was Liverpool, we'd go. But he sends him a plane ticket, and they book him in the biggest hotel in Manchester. And he comes and he sees us at the Beachcomber and says, get rid of the band. I'll work with Peter Noone. And we say, no, we're a band. We're all mates. We can't get rid of this band. We've worked 2 years on this, putting this thing. He says, okay, come to the studio. And we go to the studio and we do a demo. and fail miserably. And he says after the session to Harvey Lisberg, you've got to get rid of the bass player, get a drummer who can play in time, and come back in a week. So we go, and that night we meet in my mother's house, and we get rid of the drummer and the bass player, who are the originals. They've been in it since the Cyclones and Pete Novak and the Heartbeats and whatever other name. But we get rid of them, and one of them goes and lies down in the middle of the road trying to get run over by a car because he can't imagine his life without being one of the Hermits. And we recover quickly and we rehearse, and we find Harvey knows these two other guys. There are actually three other guys, but we can only take two of them because one of them is too heavy.
That would screw up the van travel.
Just too heavy, you know. He doesn't look the part. He's a great player, but he doesn't look like he could be like a pop star. So he's gone, and we bring in Derek Leckenby and Barry Whitwam, and we rehearse like 100 hours, and somehow we get a demo. Nobody really knows the story of the demo, but we get a Carole King demo, and it's I'm Into Something Good, and we spend 8 hours a day learning I'm Into Something Good with all the ooh, one night stands, ooh, held my hand, all of that stuff.
You got the demo from Mickey.
We don't know. Nobody really knows, so I'm not going to say. I like living witnesses to all my stories. A demo showed up. Harvey got it. We don't know where he says he got it from. That's another book.
Was the demo the Carole King demo, or was it the Earl Jean version of Something Good?
We had both. We had the Carole King demo and the Earl Jean and the Cookies, whatever it was. So one of them had a better version of the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and we can't do that. So ultimately what happens is we get back to the studio and it doesn't really sound good. And I've got in my head that it's surf music, even though I don't know what surf music means. And I'm in the thing with Mickey Most, who he understands everything that I say. It's the strangest thing. You know, if I said to him, you know, that echo on the Roy Orbison, I'm Crying. You go, oh, yeah. And that'll be... So Mickey and I somehow have some sort of communication skills with each other. And he says, you know, Roger Webb is in the room next door. I'm going to get him in to play the piano on this.
Roger Webb was a lot older than you guys, right?
He was probably 40. Everybody was a lot older than us. We were very naive as well. We didn't know anything about anything else. We knew nothing about girls except what we'd learned from our sisters.
I can't repeat this enough. You are 16 years old at this point, right?
Yeah, 16. Yeah, 16.
16, that's so young.
Yeah, but everybody in bands all the new bands were full of kids, you know, because it had started long enough ago that, you know, drummers were 16 and good already. So he gets this Roger Webb in who basically makes the record because he gets the feel that we're looking for. And he goes, da 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 da, and suddenly the whole thing comes together. We finish it, and Mickey mixes it in 1 minute. So we feel this isn't Mickey's cup of tea, basically. And he goes home, he takes the record home to his wife, and he says, they're nice boys and everything, and they're really mean, they've good intentions and everything, and the lead singer's got a good sounding voice, but I'm going to have to drop it. I'm not going to sign it. And his wife said, I bet you £100 it's a number one record.
His wife had ears.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he puts it out. And, you know, in those days, this is Monday, you put it out on Thursday. And on Friday, we're back in the Beachcomber in Bolton, which is a real dumpy little place at the time, you know, and we're in the kitchen getting changed, as we always did. The kitchen is on the first floor, you know, and there's a ground floor place, and then there's the cellar club, and we're getting changed upstairs. And a bloke called Jimmy Savile, another dark story.
Another very dark story, yes.
Here they are, Herman and the Hermits. I'm Into Something Good. and we hear the record for the first time.
That was on Radio 1?
Yeah, the early days of Radio 1.
Wow.
There was only 30 minutes a day of music, I think. And at 6:30, Jimmy Savile comes on, and the first record he plays Hermits. And we knew him because we'd always played the Manchester Plaza where he was the manager.
Right.
And we would play there a lot. We played there. The first Herman and the Hermits date was for him.
So he plays the song, and all of a sudden it blows up.
Well, it was an instant success. I mean, 3 weeks later, we were on Top of the Pops.
Woke up this morning feeling fine. There's something special on my mind. Last night I met a new girl in the neighborhood. Whoa, yeah. Something tells me I'm into something good. Something tells me I'm into something. She's the kind of girl who's not too shy.
What record label release? Were you on MGM at that point? Or because Rack didn't exist, right?
We were on an English label called Columbia,
Okay.
which was part of the EMI. They had Parlophone, Columbia, and those were the two labels. And the Beatles were on Parlophone and we were on Columbia.
So at what point does the band sign with MGM Records in America?
Sometime along, the record, I think we could have been on Capitol, but they didn't want us. We've got the telegrams now. We've got enough.
Well, you're in good company there. They did the same thing to the Beatles.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone was being dropped. Dave Clark 5, all the people that could have been for free at EMI are all dropped by the same guy. And me and Harvey, desperately, Harvey Lisberg, the manager, desperately want to be Americans. We've only got American records in our record collection, and we know that the band's future has to have America in it, and it's still very difficult, America. We got a deal by accident with MGM. I think they signed, Johnny Tillotson, Connie Francis, the Animals, and part of the package with the Animals, they got Herman's Hermits.
Was that through Mickey because he produced both bands?
Probably, because he had the record contract. He had the rights to go and sell it wherever he wanted to.
Right. And the added plus you get with MGM Records in America at the time is they were connected to MGM Film Studios. So down the line, you will be starring in your own MGM films.
Oh, they gave us a 3 major motion picture deal. When we signed on 65 contract, after we had 3 records in the top 20, and we signed, and they gave us 3 motion pictures. And they gave Roy Orbison a motion picture deal as well. The fastest guitar in the West.
How many films? There was Pop Gear, there was Boys Meet the Girls, Hold On, Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter. What, 4 films you starred in?
Well, Pop Gear was just a thing that there was a vehicle for Matt Monro that had the Beatles and Herman's Hermits and the Animals. Everybody was in it. It was just like you went to Wardour Street in a recording studio where they made porn movies. and it was kind of a fun date because those people got the Animals to walk around the studio singing House of the Rising Sun. And they asked us to do it, and we said, no, we don't. We want to stand still.
That's funny.
But the Animals did it. So we teased the Animals forever. Then the 3 motion pictures where we did When the Boys Meet the Girls, and the plot was Herman comes to America as a college student and meets a girl and falls in love, and that was Connie Francis. The second one was Herman comes to America and meets a girl, and it's Shelley Fabre. So the game is getting better. And we decided, like, the Beatles had done 2 movies where they ran away from girls, and the Dave Clark 5 had stupidly done a movie where they ran away from girls called Catch Us If You Can. So we said, let's make a movie where we get caught by some of the fit girls. We were pretty funny guys. Herman's Hermits were fun people all around.
Talk about your first trip to America, having you and Harvey having all these American records in your record collection.
I had a list of people that I wanted to meet. I was like, it was so bizarre. I'd met Roy Orbison in Manchester in a corridor. And And it was a game changer. So I'd met the Everly Brothers and I'd met Roy Orbison. I wanted to meet Sam Cooke, and I had all this list of people. So we got to America, and the first person I met in 200 West 57th Street was Tony Orlando. And
I just interviewed him for this podcast last week. How funny is that?
I'd had all his records. I'd had a couple of big records, Halfway to Paradise and Blessed, and I'd got them. Me and my sister had his records. So it was like he was an important person to me. And he was in his little office at 200 West 57th Street with, our new agents who had I remember I was very impressed with the agents because I said, well, who have you got? That was how illiterate we were. The only thing we could ask an agent was like, well, who have you got? And he said, well, I got Freddie Cannon and Gary U.S. Bonds. And I almost fainted. Gary U.S. Bonds and Freddie Cannon. Oh. So they put us immediately to work. We get sent out on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars with Little Anthony and the Imperials.
Just interviewed him, too. Keep going. You're 2 for 2.
Lucky some of these people are still alive.
I know.
Little Anthony, Billy Stewart, and the I Continue to Turn Arquettes. And we're on this bus for 87 days. We were getting $500 a day.
All the artists are on one bus together.
Yeah. And we start in a high school in New Jersey where we don't play one single note of the song. The band start to play, some Peter Gunn opening. And the guy announces, Herman! And I walk out on stage and everybody in the high school joined us on stage and started to take the equipment and rip our clothes off. And we tried to stop them.
Perfect.
We tried to stop. No, don't rip my clothes off. Oh, all right then.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, and it was like mayhem. And we enjoyed that. And then we got on the bus with the boys there and found out that there was another thing going on in America that we had no idea about. And we're now watching every show that we can see, and I've got a cop. I hire a cop in every town to basically, the cops always knew where it was safe to go. And I'm out every night seeing every band that you could possibly, in dangerous situations, seeing everybody you could possibly see, and watching every night Bobby V, Freddie Cannon, Little Anthony Imperials, Billy Stewart, watching these major talents on stage every night going, whoa, we're not going to look at a band now and learn what not to do. Now we're going to look at bands and find out what we should be doing.
What year is this, Peter? 64, 63?
Early 65.
65.
Spring 65.
65 becomes just a magical year for you guys because in 1965, Herman's Hermits have 7 top 10 singles in 1 year when you're 17 years old. That just blows my mind. 7 top 10 singles in 1 year in America.
It all seemed pretty natural, When I think, in retrospect, I think we handled all that kind of major success in a, I shouldn't say this, but the Beatles were living under a shadow called Elvis Presley. And Herman's Hermits were living under this shadow called the Beatles. The Beatles, you couldn't compare yourself to them because they were handsome, they were all good looking, they were all great comedians, they were all brilliant musicians, and they were all together. We were kind of thrown into this thing, he's in this band and he likes Buddy Holly, and we didn't have some sort of mission. It all just was given to us, and we were put on a bus with people and they liked us. I'd say to Billy Stewart, how come we always eat in the same place, Baskin and Rock? Why do we always eat in the same restaurant every day? And he says to us, well, that's the only place they'll let us sit at the counter. And all this with 16, 17-year-old boys with absolutely no knowledge about anything.
Right.
Seriously, no education in the music business,
right,
other than being good listeners,
right,
and having good taste in the kind of music that we listen to. There's a watershed moment in Herman's Hermits when we're playing in the Twisted Wheel in Manchester, downstairs in the Twisted Wheel, an all-night session. And it becomes a choice. Do we want to be Big Bill Broonzy or Bobby V. Bobby V is like this teen pop idol. Well, I'm looking all night long. I don't think I can do that. I could probably do a good Bobby V and like spoof Johnny Cash. But that Big Bill Broonzy thing, I mean, we didn't know that Mick Jagger would be able to take that and put it in his voice. So we went the other way. We became a pop band. And that's why we had 7 records in the charts.
Every time I see you looking my way, baby, baby, can't you hear my heartbeat? In the park or walking down the highway, baby, baby, can't you hear my heartbeat? When you move up closer to me, I get a feeling that's ooey. Can't you hear the pounding of my heartbeat? 'Cause you're the one I love. You're the one I love.
And lived under the shadow of the Beatles, who could do everything. They could do every kind of music.
Right. You were making music for girls and proudly making music for girls.
The business was changing, remember. It was all girls. And then suddenly a few boys started to show up. And then the Stones showed up in America. And then you start to see 12% of the audience were boys. And then suddenly it went all boys. There was no space in that for us. We never went after the girls, by the way. We never sort of did the shaking leg Elvis Presley thing, because lots of people did that better than me. So I left that alone. I said, we're going to be entertaining and sing along, and we're going to do songs that people can connect to, you know. I wonder what she's doing now, the girl that I left you for, and all that stuff. When I would sing the songs, I was singing Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter to Mrs. Brown.
Right.
Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter. Girls as sharp as her are something rare. But it's sad, she doesn't love me now. She's made it clear enough, it ain't no good to pine.
It's a different kind of thing. I decided that there wasn't a fourth wall, that the audience were all in the show with us, like the feeling I got when I saw the Beatles.
Right.
The Beatles in that field made me feel like I was in the band.
Right. Right. You know, it's so fascinating, this era that you're talking about. You were friendly with the Stones. You were in the studio and friendly with the Beatles. The Who opened for you. You know, it's this time and place that's fascinating, even in the studio musicians who would ultimately play on a bunch of your records, John Paul Jones, Jimmy Page, Vic Flick, Herbie Flowers, like the greatest, Clem Cattini, like the greatest players of all time, would be playing on these records. John Paul Jones is arranging and conducting, and this is before, you know, the New Yardbirds. This is before Led Zeppelin. Mickey Mo's partner is Peter Grant. Peter Grant goes on to manage Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the most fascinating time and place. I can only imagine being a teenager and living through it.
The thing that people don't understand is England is a very small place. Everybody knew each other and knew where they were, kind of. We had a couple of newspapers, New Musical Express, Melody Maker, Record Mirror, and you could read those papers and find out what the Beatles were doing, what the Stones were doing, what the Yardbirds were doing, what Peter Grant was signing, what Mickey Mouse was recording. It was all a small scene. So, you know, it would be nothing to... let me tell you, Top of the Pops. You'd go to Top of the Pops, and we did it a lot because we had 20 singles. You'd go to the Top of the Pops, and some people were cool, and they didn't interact with the other bands, but the Beatles did. The Beatles would hang around and say, hello, where are you? And a couple of the Stones were very friendly, and it was a small scene, so it would be nothing to go on Top of the Pops and meet Frankie Valli and Roy Orbison and the Beatles. I remember that we had a Must to Avoid, a record called maybe it's not that one, but She's a Must to Avoid. But I was on Top of the Pops, and the Beatles were on Top of the Pops singing Paperback Writer. And as you can see, I don't know dates really well, but I can remember the song that the Beatles was doing was Paperback Writer. And because I'm a fan of music, I'm standing with those girls who dance, those girls and boys who dance in front of the Beatles, who want to be on the television so their mum sees them, or their Auntie Celia, dancing like in front of the camera and everything. And you can see me standing there looking at the Beatles in awe, because and George sees me and sings Frère Jacques. Frère Jacques. Yeah, I mean, that's just great. I'm the luckiest guy in the world, because I was a fan, and I didn't pretend not to be. I never thought to be, I'm too cool. And a lot of that stuff, like I'd go up to Roy Orbison and people see us everywhere. Like, stupid. I was such a naive idiot. I would always sing somebody's song to them. As if, look, I know who you are. All right, this train.
It's probably charming and endearing. Plus, you were a beautiful child and a beautiful teenager. Your looks keep coming up, where Mickey Most, I read, was fascinated to meet you because he thought you looked like a young JFK.
Yeah, and that, I didn't know any of that, because boys are never uncomfortable with their appeal. That all I remember was all the girls that I fancied were all about 5 years older than me.
Is it true that you thought the Beatles wrote For No One for you?
Yeah, because I saw the track listing and I thought that, oh God, because my friends like Billy J. Kramer, the Beatles had written lots of songs. It was like, how did you do that? We knew Billy because we'd started out in the same scene. We were part of the same scene when it was William Ashton. And have you interviewed him yet? He's got a great story. And he's brilliant, man. He's a brilliant man. He was negative about the fact that the Beatles, he tells a story like that he's at John's house. He's at John's house and John plays Please Please Me on the piano. And Billy J. Kramer says, "Oh, can I have that one?" And John says, "No." No.
So you thought For No One was For Noone.
Well, it is For Noone.
And in her eyes you see nothing, no sign of love behind the tears cried for no one, a love that should have lasted years. You want her, you need her, and yet you don't believe her when she says her love is dead. You think she needs you.
The no one thing had followed me all around school. I was always known as one. It just took one teacher to call, which one of you lot is no one? And everyone, and then I became no one at school.
There you go, For No One.
From the very first school, and I took it to the second school. I didn't last very long at any of the schools.
Right, you had to go and wash windows and sell newspapers, whatever it was to make a living back then as a teenager.
And I used to cheat because I didn't have time to do the homework, right. So because I was in a band.
You talked about the NME and some of the other publications in the UK. Yeah. I want to talk about someone who doesn't get talked about a lot, but is a person who you feel really helped you and your band achieve a success in America, and that's Gloria Stavers. And Gloria Stavers had a magazine that she ran in America called 16 Magazine. We had a podcast guest last season, Danny Goldberg, who famously managed Nirvana and ran Atlantic Records, among many other things. Gloria Stavers, Danny Goldberg told me that Gloria Stavers completely changed his life. So she was somebody who doesn't really get talked about a lot, but, the male editors at the time, since she was, talking about Herman's Hermits and the Beatles and the Stones and Dave Clark 5 at the time, they called her Mother Superior of the Inferior. But she was your friend, and talk about Gloria's role.
She was my friend, and that is a different thing. I really liked her. She was very smart. She had been in another culture before she was in 16 Magazine. She was kind of an artist. She would show up, and she was a good companion because she was not afraid of anything. And, in show business, 99% of it is shinola. And I tried to be under the radar. You know, I wouldn't do red carpet. Mick Jagger never did a red carpet. So I don't do red carpet, and she understood. She was smart. So we would hang around, and she'd take some pictures, and then we talked about her power a lot. And she liked to be able to, you know, people like to talk about themselves. I do. If you got on the front page of 16 magazine or had a color insert in the middle, it was almost like being Playboy and Playmate of the Month to her following. And she believed that the girls that followed her, remember, were her girls. And it was to me, it was a fascinating, because she would change. Like, you know, I knew Brian Jones pretty well, and he'd write things in his, you know, thing. She would change them because she didn't think that girls would like to know that part about him.
Right. She loved her audience, and she took her audience very seriously.
Very seriously. So I liked her, and you know, she got very sick, and I was one of the few people who was around at the end, because while you being a star maker kind of thing, you also make a lot of enemies.
Right.
So I stayed around, and I think Danny stayed around, Danny Goldberg. But you know, it was part of the scene that, you know, she would show up for the Dave Clark 5 and be allowed access to their hotel rooms to take pictures because she was so important.
Right.
And, you know, people instantly forget that there was a pop scene. It used to be a pop scene.
Right.
The charts used to be Beatles #1, Sound of Music #2,
right.
The Bachelors,
right.
Ramona was #3. There was a music scene that everybody participated in. My mom bought a Fortunes record. My mother went out and bought a record by the Fortunes, like, if you think to you, my friend, you've got your troubles, I've got mine.
Yeah, great song.
And, you know, yeah, great record.
Yeah, pop record.
She didn't know about any of the people,
right.
But my mom knew the names of the Beatles. She didn't know the names of the Stones. She knew the names of the Beatles.
Right. Well, I'm glad that we're able to talk about somebody like Gloria, because she passed away, you know, in the early 1980s, and she doesn't get talked about enough. Let's talk about the hits that you guys had, because as an A&R person, I am fascinated that you guys recorded so many songs and had so many hits in such a tight timeline. Who was finding these songs? The A&R was genius. You know, I mean, with talking about I'm Into Something Good, we mentioned. Can't You Hear My Heartbeat? Silhouettes,
Mickey.
a cover. Mickey was finding songs, but you were finding songs too. Mrs. Brown was a song that you and the band brought to Mickey, right?
Yeah, but he wouldn't record it if he didn't like it. And we wouldn't record it if we didn't like it. There was this sort of unspoken pact. You know, we'd start singing a song and he would tell we don't like it, and he'd go, next, give that one to Donovan. You know, that is Mickey's shtick.
Right. But when you're recording these songs, again, the studio cats, I mean, your band played on a bunch of these records, but some of the studio cats, like you mentioned before, whether it was piano on I'm Into Something Good with Roy Webb or Vic Flick on Silhouettes, I mean, that's brilliant. You know, what Jimmy Page did on Wonderful World is brilliant. I mean,
brilliant.
People don't realize this. You should go back and listen to the licks that Jimmy Page is playing on Wonderful World, and what a tribute to Sam Cooke, like you were talking about earlier.
Well, that was a tribute to Sam Cooke. That's Eric Burdon right before us had done Bring It On Home to Me as a tribute. We thought we were doing a tribute. I wanted to do Cupid, but we did Wonderful World.
Don't know much about history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about science books. Don't know much about the French I took. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. Don't know much about geography.
And I didn't really know Wonderful World. Mickey chose all the songs, by the way.
Right.
Everything. If he didn't like it, we didn't record it. And if he didn't like it enough, he'd put it on the B-side. Like Listen People, one of the best songs we had, was put on the B-side in England
right.
because he didn't like it.
Right.
And To Sir With Love by Lulu was put on the B-side of The Boat That I Wrote. So he wasn't always right, but
What's interesting is some of the songs that sound the most quote-unquote English to me, like Henry VIII I Am or Mrs. Brown, were never singles in the UK. It's kind of ironic.
I think, because we had a thing called an EP, and Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, sold 1 million records in England because it was part of an EP,
right,
along with 3 other songs.
Right.
For 12 shillings, you could get 4 songs instead of 10 shillings for 2. It was all mix and match. It was a soundtrack, so it gets played because it was a free play on BBC.
Right. At the height of Mrs. Brown, which was number 1 in America, one of your 2 number 1s in America, in 1965, you, Peter Noone, are one of the faces on the cover of Time magazine. In their May 1965 issue, Rock and Roll, Everybody's Turned On, other faces on the cover of the Beach Boys and the Supremes. There's a quote from the article that I must recite right now because, again, it talks about your looks. An engaging high school dropout who looks like a toy sheepdog. Herman, real name Peter Noone, smiles a lot, claps his hand, sticks his fingers in his mouth when he sings, and Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, recorded in a heavy English Midlands accent, is the number 1 best-selling song in the country.
Isn't that great? What a great thing to... I didn't read it. We didn't even know what Time magazine was. I didn't see it until 30 years later.
You either look like JFK or a toy sheepdog or Sherman from Mr. Peabody. You pick.
I'm lucky journalists didn't say I look like, somebody horrible. You never know. Now, I was afraid of journalism even back then. They weren't all kind to us. So the Time magazine was a huge one, and it meant a lot. I remember Trini Lopez is on that cover. You didn't mention him.
The Shindig Dancers are on that cover too.
Yeah. See, that was the scene. That was the scene. And if it got in Time magazine, it was probably already passé.
Right.
It was a very fast-moving train, that train.
Talk about fast-moving train. Again, in the year 1965 alone, all the songs I mentioned, Mrs. Brown, Wonderful World, I'm Henry VIII I Am, Just a Little Bit Better, A Must to Avoid, they're all, along with Silhouettes and Can't You Hear My Heartbeat, they're all top 10s in the same year, which is crazy. And the songs are coming from everywhere. I'm Henry VIII I Am was actually a song first recorded in 1910 in the UK music hall scene by Harry Champion. If you hear the Hermits version of that song, you may not know that there are actually verses in the Harry Champion version, but you guys didn't know the verses, so you just sang the chorus.
I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an Henry. She wouldn't have a Willie or a Sam. No, Sam. I'm her 8th old man, I'm Henry. Henry VIII, I am. Second verse, same as the first. I'm Henry VIII.
Actually, it was part of the remnants of the big band era. And if you were in Nashville, you'd say back to one. And if it was really just do the same thing again.
Second verse, same as the first.
Yes, let's play the same thing again. And that was, and Mickey left it in. It should have said second chorus, same as the first. Wasn't work, second verse, same as the first. So, and then.
But the joke is it's not a verse, it's a chorus.
I know, but if you listen to the Harry Champion thing, there's none of the Hermits melody in it.
Right.
It's a complete rewrite from when you hear your grandfather sing it on the piano, going, I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am, I am. It isn't anything like I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am, I am. It's a completely different tune and more staccato and more fun. And how it developed was it was Mickey Mouse's idea to do the song, and Derek Leckenby came up with that kind of Chuck Berry thing. Chuck Berry was his idol,
right?
Chuck Berry lick, and Barry Whitwam came up with the which makes it, and that all happened. I think the record is as long as the recording. session.
The record is 1 minute and 54 seconds, and it holds the record as the second shortest #1 single in the history of America. There you go.
What's the first?
Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs. Won't you stay?
Oh, my God. And I've seen people do that for 40 minutes.
So later hits include No Milk Today from your friend Graham Gouldman, and There's a Kind of Hush, which was actually a cover by the band better known for Winchester Cathedral, the new vaudeville band later covered by the Carpenters. But back to Henry VIII. Did you see the scene in the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze where he's driving her crazy, and that's the song he's singing to drive her crazy with?
It obviously worked. You know, it got used on all kinds of things. It's just such a fun, everybody, when I do a show, everybody sings second verse, same as the first, as if it's some magical thing. And politicians use it. And it just became one of those, like, today, gone tomorrow, whatever. It became one of those.
Right. I mean, it's almost like if you mentioned the Sex Pistols earlier, but even if you listen to the Ramones, hey, ho, let's go, that probably doesn't exist without second verse, same as the first. It's all coming from the same place.
The Ramones do it in one of their songs as well, second verse, same as the first.
Right.
And it just, anyway, the whole thing was, remember, I can't think of the word, but it all seemed to be incredibly fun. And people, somebody once wanted to do a film of like Herman's Hermits, the story of Herman's Hermits, and they got all the 8mm films from the Hermits, Keith and Carl and Lech and Barry, and they got all the things together. And the director said, but wait a second, Peter Noone isn't in any of these videos. And Barry Whitwam, the drummer, says, well, he was never there at the hotel. He was always off doing all the promotion. And one of the things that caused Herman's Hermits to fail was because we started out equal, but the lead singer always gets all the attention.
Right.
And although I was the youngest one, I became the spokesman. And that caused some sort of...
Right. There's a famous story of you meeting the Queen Mother, and the moms of your bandmates wanted to know, why is Peter there and why aren't you there? And that's got to cause some friction.
Definitely. And because I was very naive, I didn't even realize that meant anything to them. I didn't realize that it would hurt Derek Leckenby's feelings to let Jimmy Page play Wonderful World. And I would say, what are you worried about? He only played it once. By the time you've played it 4 or 5 times live, you'll be playing it better than him.
Right.
I didn't realize that was kind of an insult.
Right. Well, that's, I guess, one of the, the blessing and the curse of being 16, 17 years old when this is happening. You don't have the wisdom of lived life to know that this is actually going to hurt somebody's feelings.
See, hurt feelings, I didn't know anything about that.
Right.
And it wasn't stoicism. It was just I didn't understand how anything could hurt your feelings. If the record was in the charts, isn't that enough?
Right. And
if it's on the radio, what are you complaining about?
Right. But these records 60 years on still speak for themselves. It's impossible to listen to I'm Into Something Good. We haven't even talked about the re-record you did for The Naked Gun, but it's impossible to listen to Something Good or Henry VIII or Mrs. Brown or Kind of Hush or any of these songs and not get a smile on your face because they're happy records. It's impossible to be annoyed listening to those songs. They put a smile on your face.
And I think it's part of the British invasion that the word enthusiast is an important word, because everybody who was in it, like all the guys in the Dave Clark Five, they weren't the greatest musicians ever, but they were really enthusiastic.
Right.
And you can hear that on the records, the enthusiasm. And remember that we came to America, and not to say that they weren't phenomenal talents, but they were all a bit Bobby Rydell and Fabian, a bit this pullover that you gave to me. It had all gone a bit that way. And the competition, it was a bit sort of overly romantic. There was the do, 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 do. There was all that going on at the same time. But the American lead singers were all a bit hair glue.
Right. Fabian's a good example of that. Yeah, absolutely. But you now, we're talking about 60 years later, and we're talking about you're still out there doing 100 shows a week. I read a quote that you're, maybe 5-10 years ago, you got to a point where it turned back into being pure fun. And you walked onto a stage singing a song that's almost 60 years old, and you look into the audience and they're singing it right back to you. What better feeling can you have, having recorded the song so long ago that it's still bringing joy to people today?
Again, I was in Canada in a place that I didn't want to go to because I didn't like the sound of the name. It was Lulu's. And during the guitar solo of I'm Into Something Good, we'd only rehearsed once with this band, and they were Canadians. I'd never met them. And they were replacing the Hermits, and they did such a good job of it that during the guitar solo, I said to myself, this is what you do. This is where you're supposed to be, Peter. You're not supposed to be on Broadway. You're not supposed, that's all too different. This is what you do. And it's a great feeling to know what you're supposed to be doing, I gave 100% of my future and all my past into being me now.
Right. And it's what everybody wants to see because, it puts a smile on your face. Not that the Broadway didn't. You were an excellent Broadway actor in Pirates of Penzance. We didn't get to that. A couple of other things right before we wrap up. You got married on your 21st birthday. And you're still married. Is it over 55 years now?
I think it's 56 on November the 5th.
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.
You got married on your birthday. So your birthday and your anniversary is the same day.
Because I could sign the contract. It was the first contract that I could ever sign. So we waited until November 5th so that I didn't have to have my mom and dad sign for me.
On your 21st birthday. Are you still hosting your show on Sirius XM, Something Good with Peter Noone?
Still, I've done this Saturdays already, and it's great because it's a vehicle to promote me and the British invasion and do 60s records.
Well, you're still touring, like we mentioned, 100 shows a year. The last thing I want to mention, because I was not aware of this before getting ready to interview you today, you had a band in 1980 called the Tremblers. And the Tremblers didn't sound like Herman's Hermits. If you listen to that record now, which I did a few days ago, this is a straight-up power pop record. You have Stan Lynch from the Heartbreakers, Tom Petty's band, co-writing with you. I felt like I was listening to a Dwight Twilley album. I didn't feel like I was listening to a Peter Noone record.
Well, that's what I would have been listening to at the time. Dwight Twilley, Phil Seymour, all that stuff. I was into that. And Tom Petty, early, Mudcrutch. So what it was I thought I would like to find out where Herman's Hermits would have gone.
Right.
And that was the Tremblers. Where would we have, if we'd have stayed together, where would we be now? And that was it. Nice, fun, happy, fun, silly songs. Dad said, keep your hands on the cover when you're laying in bed and be nice to your sister or it's water and bread. That kind of stuff, would have been Herman's Hermits if we'd have stayed together and developed into something else.
It's funny, listening to that album, my A&R ears definitely got on high alert. There's a song that sounds like a hit to my ears on that album called Wouldn't I? And I kept listening to it, and I'm like, that probably would have been a hit in another time,
All I really want is just a piece of your time. All I want to do is get inside your mind.
Yeah, but nobody played it. By then, radio was very specific. And, I did the deal with Epic and Bruce Johnston from the Beach Boys. And, they gave us a load of money and we spent it all on the record and not on the promotion.
Well, the great thing about Spotify now and the other digital music services is anyone listening to our voices today can go and listen to that Tremblers record and see if you agree with me if Wouldn't I should have been a hit.
I agree with you. I think lots of records I made should have been hits, but we didn't have Mickey Most to say do that one. But he chose one of the songs I did on the Tremblers, that Green Shirt by Elvis Costello. He said, record that. That one will be a good one for you, whatever Herman's Hermits would have been.
So you have mentioned that Mickey Most was your best friend.
best friend, best man at my wedding, godfather to my daughter, lifelong friend. We hit it off musically. He was a fan of music as well.
So you were in touch with Mickey through the end of his life?
Always, yeah. Always. And I was in touch with his wife until recently. She passed away as well. You know, it's an unusual friendship, you know, because our connection was music, the love of music.
Right.
I didn't connect to him on any other level. I didn't do the champagne.
Well, you were kindred spirits in music. I remember being in London a few years ago and getting to visit Rack Studios, Mickey Mo's studio, and it's almost like a shrine. His office hasn't been touched or hadn't been touched at that point. And you're looking at, you know, what Mickey Most did for popular music in the era of the 60s and 70s where he was making this music. You know, these records are going to last forever.
I hope you're right. I mean, it'd be great because he was a good bloke. So let's hope all of his stuff lasts around. You know, I mean, he good intentions, remember.
Yeah,
the intention
absolutely.
was to make records that people liked.
And success, you know, because people still love these songs today. And as we mentioned, if you'd like to see Hermits featuring Peter Noone, we are looking at 2025, hopefully 100 shows.
I hope so, yeah, and I hope they're good ones, you know, because I did a good one last week. It may be the best one I ever do, so maybe you shouldn't bother.
Well, I think everybody should go out and see for themselves. Peter, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
No milk today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands forlorn, a symbol of the dawn. No milk today, it seems a common sight, but people passing by don't know the reason why. How could they know just what this message means? The end of my hopes, the end of all my dreams. How could they know a palace there had been behind the door?
Special thanks to Peter Noone from Herman's Hermits for joining us this week. It was great to have such a candid conversation about his long, successful career. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another episode of Rock and Roll High School.
Rock and Roll High School is a presentation of Pure Tone Music. Produced by Pete Ganbarg, with assistance from Craig Rosen, Ron Robinson, Stefan Accardo, Joe Palmerico, Zach Kornhauser, Ross Owen, Elena Luvis, Claire Hudson, Steve Leeds, and Rich Mahan. Please visit our website at rockschoolpodcast.com for past episodes and information on what's coming next. All rights reserved.